Imagine being one of the richest men in America, and yet standing in front of a crowd, humiliated because your card gets declined not once, not twice, but 3 times. Everyone laughs, nobody believes you. But then, out of nowhere, a little black girl steps forward and does something no one could have expected, something that changes both of their lives forever. On a chilly Saturday morning, a man named Richard Langston, a billionaire who had built his empire from the ground up, decided to return to the one place he hadn't seen in decades, his old hometown. He stepped out of his sleek black SUV wearing a designer jacket that most people in the neighborhood couldn't even afford to touch. But this time, Richard wasn't looking to be admired. He wanted something different. He wanted to blend in, to feel normal again. So, he walked into the small corner store he used to visit as a boy. The smell of coffee brewing and fresh bread baking carried him back in time. For just a moment, he wasn't a billionaire. He was just Richard from Maple Street. He filled his basket with snacks, drinks, and a few comfort foods he hadn't tasted in years. The cashier smiled politely as he placed everything on the counter. Richard pulled out his sleek black credit card, the kind that usually guaranteed respect. But this time, the machine beeped, declined. The cashier tried again, declined, and again, declined. The room grew silent. All eyes turned toward Richard. Whispers filled the store. "Wow, can't even pay for groceries," someone muttered. "Some rich guy, huh?" another scoffed. Richard's face flushed red. He tried to explain. There must be some mistake. This card always works. But nobody believed him. To them, he was just another man pretending to be something he wasn't. And in that moment, the billionaire who once commanded boardrooms and luxury yachts stood humiliated at a corner store counter. But then, from the back of the line, a small voice broke the tension. "Excuse me, sir. You can use mine." Everyone turned to see her. A little black girl, no older than 9, clutching a small jar filled with coins. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. She said softly, "You shouldn't go hungry." The entire store gasped. A billionaire with a black card couldn't pay, but a child was willing to give up her savings. Richard looked down at her in disbelief. Who was this girl, and why would she do such a thing? The crowd leaned closer, waiting, but before Richard could respond, what happens when a billionaire is humbled by a child's act of kindness, and why would she risk her precious coins for a stranger? Stay with me. Richard knelt down, still shaken. He looked at the girl's small jar of coins. They weren't much, but to her, they meant everything. "Sweetheart," Richard whispered, "why would you give me this? You don't even know me." The girl's dark brown eyes locked onto his. She clutched the jar tighter and said, "Because one day, I might need help too. And my grandma says kindness always comes back." The room went silent. The laughter faded. Even the cashier froze. People whispered, "Did you hear that? She's giving up her own money for him." Richard felt a lump in his throat. He had built empires, signed deals worth billions, but never in his life had he been so moved. He tried to protest. "I can't take your money. That's for you." But the girl gently pushed the jar forward. "It's okay. My grandma's sick. I've been saving for her medicine. But if you need it now, then you should have it." Richard's chest tightened. His pride, once a shield, was now cracking. The cashier, uncomfortable, rang up the items. "Sir, do you want to use the coins?" Richard looked around. Some people shook their heads in disgust. Others admired the girl. Richard finally said, "No, not today. I'll manage somehow." But inside, he knew he couldn't walk away, not after what he had just witnessed. As Richard left the store, his groceries abandoned, he glanced back. The little girl placed her coins back into the jar, holding it close. Her grandmother, frail and coughing, took her by the hand. Together, they walked down the street. Richard stood frozen. Something about them tugged at his heart. That night, in his hotel suite, Richard couldn't sleep. The girl's words echoed in his mind. Kindness always comes back. And for the first time in years, Richard, billionaire, businessman, and master of control, felt powerless. He had to know more. The next morning, Richard made a decision. He would follow her. But what Richard discovers about this little girl's life will shock him to his core. The next day, Richard parked his SUV a block away and quietly followed the little girl and her grandmother as they walked home from the store. They turned onto a worn-down street. The houses were old, the paint peeling, yards overgrown with weeds. Finally, they entered a small, run-down house with broken steps and a sagging roof. Richard's heart sank. This was no place for a child. Through the cracked blinds, Richard saw the girl carefully placing her jar of coins onto a shelf. She then helped her grandmother sit down, bringing her a glass of water and adjusting the old woman's blanket. "Grandma, don't worry," the girl whispered. "I'll take care of you. We'll be okay." The grandmother coughed, holding her hand. "You're my little angel, Lila, but you shouldn't have to carry so much." Richard felt his throat tighten. This little girl, Lila, was carrying more weight than most adults he knew, and yet she had offered to give him everything she had. That night, Richard sat in his car outside their home thinking. He had more money than he could ever spend. Yet here was a child living in poverty, still choosing generosity over survival. For the first time in years, Richard felt ashamed of the man he had become. But he also felt something else, a fire. He wasn't going to let this girl's kindness go unnoticed. He had to do something. But what Richard decides to do next will change not only Lila's life, but his own forever. The next morning, the small town gathered at the local school for an assembly. Parents filled the bleachers, kids chattered in excitement, but no one expected who would walk in. Richard Langston, the billionaire everyone thought had been humiliated at the store, stepped onto the stage. The room erupted in whispers. "That's him. Isn't he the guy whose card got declined? What's he doing here?" Richard cleared his throat. His voice was steady, but his eyes searched the crowd until they landed on Lila. She froze. The little girl never expected to see him again. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began yesterday, "I learned a lesson I will never forget. A lesson taught to me by a child." The audience leaned in. Richard gestured toward Lila. "This young girl offered me her savings, not knowing who I was. She had nothing to gain but everything to lose. And yet, she chose kindness." The crowd gasped. Parents stared at Lila in awe. Richard continued, his voice breaking. "Last night, I realized that I've spent years chasing wealth and power. But what is wealth without compassion?" He turned to Lila directly. "Lila, today I want to return the kindness you showed me, starting with a scholarship to cover your entire education, a fund to support your grandmother's medical care, and renovations for your home." The room exploded in applause. Lila's eyes filled with tears. Her grandmother covered her mouth, overwhelmed. But Richard wasn't finished. He added, "And one more thing. I'm creating a community fund to help families like Lila's, because no child should ever have to choose between food and medicine for a loved one." The crowd rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Lila ran onto the stage and hugged him tightly. In that moment, Richard, once humiliated at a checkout counter, was humbled in the best way possible. But Richard's journey doesn't end here, because what he admits next will leave everyone in the room speechless. The applause slowly quieted as Richard raised his hand. His voice softened. "I want to confess something. Yesterday, when my card was declined, I felt humiliated. I thought my money defined me. But then a little girl showed me that true power doesn't come from wealth. It comes from kindness." The audience hung on every word. Richard's voice cracked with emotion. "I once believed I was powerful because I had billions in the bank. But Lila, you reminded me that the greatest wealth is in giving, not taking." He placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You taught me something I forgot a long time ago, that sometimes it takes the smallest voice to teach the loudest lesson." The room stood in silence. Some wiped away tears. Others held their children close. Lila smiled up at him, whispering, "I told you, kindness always comes back." Richard's eyes welled up. For once, the billionaire had no clever words, no business strategy, just gratitude. From that day forward, Richard didn't just donate money. He stayed connected to the community. He checked in on Lila and her grandmother regularly, treating them like family. And slowly, word spread, not of Richard the billionaire, but of Richard the man who remembered where he came from and who never forgot the girl who taught him the true meaning of wealth. And so, the lesson is clear. Money may build empires, but kindness builds hearts. And sometimes, it takes the smallest voice to teach the loudest lesson. What are your thoughts on today's story? Share your comments down below. And if you believe kindness has the power to change lives, make sure you like and hit that subscribe button, because we share stories that prove it every day. And remember, we're not just telling stories, we're changing lives.